was reading some news and sports today online, and I was on ESPN.com and I saw this story that said that the NBA received an A for its diversity in racial and gender diversity or something, or I forget the link's name, but the article says NBA gets an A for diversity. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's got to be more to the story than what we read in the headline, because the NBA may be a lot of things, but diverse it is not, in my opinion. And what it was is this report that was done by the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport. And I read some of the comments on this story. The story's small. I mean, it's like a couple paragraphs long, I guess. I mean, it's just a little blurb. I could read the whole thing, but yeah, it's like a few short paragraphs. The comments were, you can expect certain flamers to be there, whatever. But there was some misunderstanding in the comments by some well-intentioned people saying, oh, you people don't understand. They're not talking about the players. They're talking about the front office and the vice presidents and the owners and blah, 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 blah. Well, rather than speculate myself, because frankly, the article didn't really specify how they came to this A grade that they gave the NBA. So what I did was I went out and found the actual report card. And it's a 36-page finding in PDF format. And I went ahead and read much of it. I can't say that I read the entire thing, but that I don't need to read the entire thing to point out some of the things that I've seen in this report. I'm going to go, if you want to follow along, if you find this, I'll link it up and you can actually see this report yourself. The report highlights, the very, very beginning of the report highlights. It says, in the NBA, 82% of the players were people of color, remaining constant from last year's totals. So there you go right there. They're talking about players. At least part of this whole report is talking about players. And they are talking about other things, owners, front office positions, and just positions in general of workers within the NBA. But they do break it down, and there actually is a section, if you go down even further, grades by category. And the category that I want to concentrate on is the players, because it's the most transparent part of the NBA. We can all see the players and coaches, at least. And I mean, if you think of the NBA, if you think of the NBA for the last 30 years or whatever, most people are going to say, if you had to say a dominant race within the NBA, it's going to be the black race, or African Americans as they call them in the report here. I'm not really big on those, politically correct terms, but the players by category, it says 82% were people of color, same as last year. The percentage of African American players remained at 77% since last year's racial and gender report card. Now, not that there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't care what the percentage of people of color or black or whatever you want to, because the NBA is clearly a performance-based occupation. It has nothing at all to do with your race. If you could play ball, you're going to be playing in the NBA. I mean, if you want to be playing in the NBA. But because of, I look at the grade that they gave for the players. They gave an A+. This is the diversity, whatever I said the title of the diversity in sports. Diversity. 82% are people of color, which means what? Non-white. I mean, they lump the people of color together. So as long as you're not white, you're counted as a person of color, I believe. So 77% black, 18% white, 3% Latino, Asians comprise 1%, and then there's other. there's a category of other. I don't know what those would be, but so I said, how did they get an A plus for this? I mean, how do we grade this? So luckily for me, I'm scrolling down again, scrolling past head coaches, scrolling past general managers, and coming down to page 15, I believe it's on. Page 15, methodology. No, it's above that. How grades were calculated. It is page 15. It says, I'm going to go down to the meat of the matter here. How do you get an A? Thus, with approximately 24% of the population being people of color, an A was achieved if 24% of the positions were held by people of color. B, if 12% of the positions were held by people of color. C, 9%. D, 6%. F, below 5%. At or below 5%. So, now try to understand what I'm saying here. I'm talking again about the players that received an A+. If the standard of measure for an A is 24% for people of color now, we're not talking African American. That was the 77 number. 84 was the number of people of color. So to get an A, you need 24%. In the case of the NBA players, you had 84% were people of color. So that destroys the 24% number. I mean, if we're grading on a curve here, poor other people, I guess. A is 24%. We have 84%. But if we're talking about diversity, is there a point at which you go above that 24% where you would get to be ridiculously high? If you're after diversity, shouldn't that number eventually go down? Shouldn't that grade go down if it's so lopsided? If the whole point, and this is what it reads, it says, the policies state that the workplace should reflect the percentages of the people in the racial group in the population. So if 24% is the racial group of people people of color, and we go from not just 24%, but we're up to 84%, is that representing the percentages of the people in these racial groups as a whole of the population? No, it's not. In fact, it's way beyond. So I want to know how you get an A+ out of that, if not for the fact that the less white people you have, the better your grade's going to be, apparently. Because that's exactly what they're doing here. But it's not really looked at by most people, because people just accept the fact almost like out of hand. Oh, yeah, we have a lot of people of color. That must be a good thing. I don't think it's a good or a bad thing. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves. How ridiculous is it if that's the standard of measure, 84%, and you were going to get an A on that? I think it ought to be looked at as, well, this isn't very diverse, but who cares if it's diverse, once again. Anyway, someone explain to me how that's the case. I'm going to be looking for their National Hockey League report next. We'll see what that one says. Something tells me that if it turns out that 96% are white, they're not going to be getting an A+. Anyway, I'll stop for now and we'll upload this and talk to you later.